dog. Hey, Joe. Good dog.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Today is February 15th, and welcome you to this month's edition of our Planning Commission meeting. We have 3 agenda items tonight. Before we jump into those, I'd like to just review our minutes from last month, and hopefully everyone's had a chance to review those. If you have, I'd call for any edits that you may recommend and or a motion to approve those.
Can't get it pulled up, but in one spot, we said we instead of he, I think is would make that sense a little bit.
All right, we have a we instead of a he change. And while we're pulling that up, just for those of you that are joining us via technology, just keep in mind that this meeting is being broadcast from the Morgan City offices. It is being live streamed over YouTube. We will have a public hearing portion of our meeting tonight, and we'll go over how we'll handle that shortly. But just know that this meeting is being recorded. And Jim, do you see where the typo is?
Scroll down a little bit, Denise. Whoop, whoop. Ed Dixon did not vote as he was recused. Agenda item, not we. The one that you have up right now, page 3 of we.
Page 2 of 3 in the motion.
Okay, I got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Any other revisions prior to voting on this? I would entertain a motion to approve these minutes otherwise.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that minutes for January Planning Commission meeting be approved as written with one change.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and vote on that motion. All in favor? Unanimous. Let's jump into our agenda for this evening. We have 3 items. We'll take them in the order that they're listed on the agenda. The first item is a public hearing rezone request for a property. And we'll pull this up on the screen, but it's a property over in the Mahogany Ridge area, a 2.35 acre piece of land that is currently zoned RN18. It's surrounded on 3 sides by property that's zoned RM15. The petition tonight is to discuss that rezone request. This is, we'll open a public hearing shortly. Here's how I'd like to proceed. Hopefully, any members of the public that we have that joined us live in person, if you wouldn't forget to sign in at the front desk if you haven't already. And then I'd like to have, if we have a representative from the development that can speak to us and address us about the project initially, at which point after that, we will open the public hearing and go through any comments that we might have with respect to that. After we close the public hearing, we'll discuss it as a commission and then make a recommendation one way or another for the city council. So that's how we'll proceed for the next few minutes. And I don't know, everyone that's in the audience, do we have a representative from the project here?
It would be the mayor because it's the city that brought forward the
Okay.
application.
All right. Well, Mr. Mayor, do you want to address us on maybe some of the history and context of what's going on here, and then we can go from there.
Well, addressing you, I'm like the blind leading the blind on this. This was somewhat explained to me last week. And let me find my page here. That's the staff notes right there. Understand this kind of took place on a Gray Jensen project. If he could, if the way I understand it, it's sort of, if I can have this, I'll give you this kind of deal on the way this zoning took place. So that's about all I know about it.
So thank you.
Do you want me to get Teresa on the phone?
Well, we can get some extra context in the room and see if we covered. If we need her, we can try that. As I understand it, originally, this piece of property was RM15 and it was converted to R18, and now it's being asked to go back to R115. And that's why all the surrounding properties, literally all the way around it, are RM15. So it was odd that it was cut out like that. But
if I can just jump in, I don't know a lot about it. Teresa really was one who explained it to me. This is being prompted by, as you look at some of those lots that are there where that cul-de-sac is in the, I'm trying to think what the subdivision that's there, to do some development there and on that piece of property that's kind of the little island there of RM15 zoning. In order to do the development there, because it's adjacent to single family zoning, they would have to provide a substantial, I think it's a 20-foot landscape buffer, which actually cuts down on the amount of property that they would be able to do some other, have some other ability to design a little differently. And the only reason they have to do that is because it's adjacent to the R18 zoning. Those properties that it's adjacent to are not likely to develop in R18. And some of it's not even developable at all. So the issue was, do we really need to have that zoning there and require that substantial landscaping buffer when there isn't going to be anything adjacent to there that it's buffering against? So that was part of the discussion. The property had been zoned RM15 some time ago. And then when I think it was Mr. Gray Jensen was proposing a development down by the interstate, for whatever reason, it kind of worked out saying, well, if you rezone this down here, then we'll zone that to R18 up there. There wasn't anything, from what I understand, that was specifically being proposed. It was just some kind of an arrangement made, and it doesn't really seem to have any bearing on anything else that's proposed in the area. So in order to kind of deal with that issue, with the increased buffering that's required, and because the property had previously been zoned RM15, it doesn't seem like that there's anything anticipated for it to be in the R18. And the city's general plan does designate this area as medium density residential zoning, which the RM15 zone would be in conformity with. That's led to the request for the rezone and staff recommendation of considering approval for it.
I do have a question on this, and I want to hear from Mr. London. I tried driving up there to picture this piece of land, and there are two things that I noticed. One, the topography is pretty rough for developing. And second, I couldn't tell what was developed that was immediately adjacent to this. It looked like it's still bare, unless I was in the wrong spot. Do we know if, even though it's zoned RM15, adjacent to it. Has anything been built out there?
Not on this island piece, not that I know of yet, though that was rezoned to the RM15 to allow for some.
But this plat that we see with that cul-de-sac.
Yeah, in that
Is
cul-de-sac.
that built out?
I don't
think it's completely built out. No.
If I can add a little bit, the layout that you're looking on that map is not, that is the subdivision that you'd have pulled into,
Okay,
but we approached the developer and as part of that subdivision, and that cul-de-sac does not exist, and that road is a through street. And
okay,
the upper road will continue on up into their development rather than tying into the existing road. So you were probably in the right place. This just doesn't show the correct layout as it was
Okay.
changed to.
That makes
Yeah,
more
it's been
sense.
changed.
Because I guess part of the question was I was trying to see if it was already built out, was it being used as RM15 or did they build out something else on it?
I think a lot of it's been with homes, with just
Single family homes?
Yeah, it will be single family homes. The area that they're talking about changing is actually the detention basin that you would have saw
Okay,
at the top of that hill. That is
that's helpful.
the area. So that's what would have probably been throwing you off driving up there.
Thank you. Mr. London.
Yeah, so who was the owner of this piece of property? I'm not, who's requesting this rezone?
Yeah, well, it's
This-
actually
The city itself is requesting the rezone. And this was part of the original Mahogany Ridge, is it the Gray Jensen development?
I believe so.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the only history I could give on it is that that was a special improvement district originally, that Mahogany Ridge area. And when the original developer got into a little bit of financial problem, another developer came along and offered to take on that project. But in doing so, he wanted all of the existing zones that had been made and all of the concessions that had been made to continue forward. I'm not sure if the rezone from RM15 to single family residential happened. I'm not sure when that happened.
2006 is from what I was told.
Okay, and I'm not sure, and I can't remember exactly why that was requested and that rezone was requested originally from RM15 to single family residence. So I apologize, I can't shed a whole lot more light on that, but
Well,
that could,
and this is just what I was told for some of the old guys at the city who are no longer with
Alive.
us, that at some point, the developer wanted to do more RM15 in another area. And someone, I guess, got stuck on, they didn't want to change the amount of RM15 versus R18.
so it was a trade.
So we're going to trade this piece of ground that's in a detention basin, a detention pond that is never
Okay,
going to be used for anything. We'll trade you that for this. And another thing I guess I want to mention, there's a strip of ground there that's already zoned RM15. And part of the reason of doing this is they'll be required, whatever they do on that property, to have a landscape buffer
yeah.
between the R18
Right.
going down the hill.
On all four sides.
And now they also, you start getting into so much that landscape buffer in the front and the rear to a detention pond is taking up so much space. It's going to make it more difficult for them to do the project they want. It'll still work. It's just, they have this landscape buffer that to a detention basin.
Yeah.
That really doesn't, there'll never be anything there to buffer against. So it'll free them up a little more room to help make their project fit a little better and make a nicer project. I hope I'm correct, but that's what I've been led to believe with
Well,
this.
and I'm not sure that was the only piece of property up there where there was a bit of a trade from, okay, if we're going to do this zone, let's put that zone somewhere else. And I think we did that.
Well,
That was done a time
If
or
I'm
two.
understanding this, though, the subject property in question is that detention area.
Yeah, well, yeah, and the
So-
hillside on the other side of the road next to
yeah,
it,
so
yes.
it's not even developable.
No.
The only reason this
Yeah,
is
not
being,
this property.
the only reason this is being considered is for the adjacent property to
Right.
not have the buffer.
Right.
And it's
Correct.
already RM 15.
Yeah,
And I was at one time told that, and this is like I say, someone that we can't ask now, that part of this swap was actually the 15 patio homes behind my house back in there.
on the other
That,
side,
that may not be correct, but that's what I was told. And
on the other side of 600 East. or
yes,
700
yeah,
East.
just back in there in the Mountain Vista.
So if this,
And I don't know why they felt like they had to do the swap. I mean, I wish I could remember.
Well, yeah, I
It
think
just
someone
doesn't-
just didn't want to change amounts of property
Yeah.
that they had in each zone, which
But that's kind of a interesting reason why, but anyway.
so if this was part of that public hearing, it was quite extensive about where the patio homes are in this property, not. I'd like to pull the minutes up on that and read that because it was
Well-
quite, if it's not the same piece.
I remember that public hearing because I was here for that. It was rezoned more RM 15 back there to allow for the patio homes. So that was done 6, 7, 8 years ago. The original rezone, when they added, it would have been in 2006 is when this would have happened. Yeah, this wasn't part of that
Okay, well,
public
that's why I was wondering.
hearing. Yeah, this would have been back in 2006-ish. I hope.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, thank you for that. Anything else to add?
No.
All right, so that's the project. That's the context, that's the background. Let's move into our public hearing portion of this meeting. We'll formally open the public hearing. Anyone that has anything to share can step to the microphone. Give their, well, we have to open it first, but state your name, make sure the little mute button's off so that the recording can pick it up. But looking forward to hearing your comments. Let's keep them brief, 2 to 3 minutes. And if somebody's already covered what you were going to cover, we don't need to rehash the same point, but if you want to add an additional point, then feel free to add on. But let's formally open the public hearing if we're ready to do that.
Mr. Chair, I move that we open the public hearing.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor? All right, the public hearing is now open, please.
Hit the
The little
Hit the-
mute button,
hit the
it'll turn
button.
your thing green.
green.
There you go.
There. Now, can you hear me? Okay, my name is Scott Jensen. The reason I'm at this meeting is because I live within the 300-foot region around this area in question. My main question is, as I understand it, the developer wants to change this from a single-family zoning area to a multifamily zoning area. Now, my understanding of what I'm hearing is that it has something to do with buffer requirements. My concern is this is a single-family area. I don't see a benefit to make it, if the end result is to have a townhome or a fourplex or something there, it doesn't fit well with the area. There's no benefit to the residents around that to do that. So if this change moves forward, I would want to understand what the benefit is to the people living nearby. Now, I live just across the street, directly across from the mayor. So that's where I am, very close to this area.
Okay.
So
thank
I
you
would
for that.
appreciate it if you could answer that question.
Well, it's a public hearing. It's intended to hear from you. I can offer some perspective. That might be about it. And what I'd like to do is maybe just come back to what was shared initially. And that is, it's already zoned as RM15. The developer that owns that property, the adjacent to what we're talking about. And can we pull up on the screen the plat map again? Yeah, right here. So if you look at the area that's outlined in red, that's the area that we're talking about changing zoning. That currently is a detention pond, and nothing's going to be there. What this enables is that little green square that's an island, that's already zoned multifamily. That's the RM15 zone. It's green because it's already zoned that. That developer.
The property that this will have the more meaning isn't the island piece.
Okay.
It's the little jog up and to the left, up and east, right? The little jog of that green that kind of sticks out in the middle there. That's the
Okay.
piece that someone wanting to develop on, and the having dual buffers front and rear is just limiting their
Okay, so
property
that's
area.
helpful. That clarifies the
Yeah,
question.
so
that
it's
I
the
had.
other
So
side.
It's so it's just that one lot that we're talking about, even though the whole project's 2 acres, that lot we're talking about, it's only, well, they would have the same buffering restrictions, correct me if I'm wrong, Wilf, even if they build a single family house. So that's part of the challenge is you can't, you have, whether you put a apartment complex, a fourplex, a townhome, or a single family home, which is consistent with the uses that are adjacent in that area. They'd still have to meet those buffering requirements that are, the petition here is that appropriate? And that's the question before us as a commission, as we make a recommendation to the city council, is trying to understand, is that consistent with the general plan? Is it consistent with the adjacent uses? Is that appropriate to make a recommendation to move forward? So we're listening to you to help us, understand what those concerns are, and then we can make an appropriate recommendation. But as far as the buffering, that's true for any development that goes on there, whether it's multifamily, single family, anything like that. And so this is just to make it usable. I don't know if that helps. Is that all right?
Yeah.
It's green already. I'm Valina Greenwell, and I live at 690 North. So just on that corner there of 700 East. And I've got a few questions. First of all, why have you included Jenny Lane in your red zoned area as a proposal? The road itself.
I don't know if I have an answer for that. Mr. Mayor, do you know?
I'm really struggling right for a second on this location.
So the side of our house where they've built that new road, where they've called it Jenny Lane. So between ours
The
and Sam's
private
house.
road, is that?
The city has not taken possession of it yet officially, but it is being used as if it is
If
already.
it's a private road, it would make sense that it would be included.
Okay, so that's us. And so this is.
We're looking at the
Sam's,
same thing you're
and
looking
this is
at.
the new road up here, which is what they've got up there.
Well,
And so immediately behind us is Darren Stiegelmeyer. Further. So
This is you.
this is us. This is Darren Stiegelmeyer here. And they're talking about this one here
That's what I thought.
and over here. And I've asked them why they've included the road, which is the new road.
Just where the-
Oh, they've
um,
The reason I've asked that is I want to know, is there an impact on any type of street parking or any type of facilities that are to be added or anything that impacts travel, parking, facilities, or anything whatsoever that impacts Jenny Lane as to the reason why it's been included? Because that directly impacts me.
Yeah, go ahead.
if I can speak to that, I'm going to assume that the reason that Jenny Lane is being included is because that is part of the development above that the walls have done on the hill, and there wouldn't be any change or impact to anything with the road. The road's there, the utilities there, the infrastructure's there. There wouldn't be any change whether that road is zoned RM15 or RM18. And I'm assuming that just because that parcel where the city hasn't taken possession of it yet, that parcel, the road is part of that parcel where the city hasn't taken possession of it yet. So they just probably drew it, that whole,
So who actually owns that road right now? Is it the Wall Group?
yes, it is still, we haven't taken given a conditional acceptance. on
That's
it
my
yet. That'll
understanding.
that'll
So
be
it's not
later
part
this
of the
year.
actual proposal that we're discussing tonight, because that's a separate owner to the Wall Group. Is that correct?
No, the Wall Group owns the detention basins as part of that development, just like everything on the hill where they've
It's
done
a
the
different
work.
name actually on the titles, I can see, but it's still owned by them.
It's the same group,
Right.
whether, I mean, I don't really know who owns it. I just know
Gotcha.
who I've worked with doing the
Gotcha.
construction
Okay.
part of it.
So same group.
Yeah, same.
Right,
Group.
right. So that was one question of why that was to be included and what impact it has. So that leads me to my second one, which is traffic and parking. And I've been involved heavily in large developments back in my home country, Australia, and working for the government. So I know a lot about this. I also know what is on paper and what is in reality. What is on paper is often very nice. But what is in reality is that the amount of people that park in their driveways and park on the street because of reduced dwelling size and therefore reduced storage size, they generally put all of their storage in their garages. And so they then park on the driveway and or the street themselves. And then of course, any people that come and live with them and any visitors has a greater impact on that. It makes the place look untidy in the least, and it makes traffic accidents more likely. And it also makes accidents with children playing in the street a lot more likely. So this, to me, is the biggest concern, is the increase of traffic and the increase of smaller dwellings, which leads to those three serious matters that I just raised. I've seen it over and over and over again. So what's good on paper does not correlate necessarily to reality. So I want you to please consider that, because I've seen a lot of problems, and particularly the lives of children being in danger and have had accidents and deaths. So that is a concern, because I know children play on the street. Kids across the road play on the street all the time. So let's think of that in your deliberations. My next question is, I know you've talked about correlating this with the surrounding property to make it all in line. But what benefit is it to the city? No one's really answered that. I mean, it looks nice. It's a nice little package. But if the original reason for taking this away was to give the allocation to another property. So if you can't build on half of this, why tie up that allocation? That doesn't seem to make sense to me, particularly how we want to improve Morgan in a robust but yet conservative manner. So the fine line there. So if we're taking a zoning that can't be used and we only have a certain amount of allocation, how does that make sense? Really? So I'd like you to consider that in your deliberations as well. And I'm sure I'll have more questions, but right now that concludes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your thoughts.
I'm Dustin Finlinson. I live in the same property that she was talking about. And one little thing I wanted to add that I was curious about, more of a question than anything, is the back of our property is currently zoned, not our property, but adjacent to just the back is currently zoned to what you're changing this to. And you were mentioning something about landscaping, buffering and whatnot, and that was part of why you wanted to change this to allow that and make it easier for other similarly zoned properties next to that. If Jenny Lane, if that road then becomes zoned the same, different than what we're zoned, but that puts a whole nother side of our property adjacent to that zoning, how does that affect how our property's buffering is currently? Does it change? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're talking about kind of the reverse of what we're saying with the subject property.
Right, because I see how it can benefit that property, absolutely. But, and if it was just the little section with retention ponds and up there, and it wasn't the road adjacent to my property, to me, it doesn't make sense that that little road coming down between our neighbor's property across the road and ours is zone, it's a road, so nothing's gonna be built there, no residential's gonna be built there, but if that zone is different and it's adjacent to my property, how does that?
Which one's your property?
690 north, 700 east,
690
so
right
it's
there.
right next to the road. It goes up to the little peninsula between the retention ponds and that other property up there.
Okay, I think I understand your question.
So I just, that's what I want to know is how will that affect what we're allowed to do on that edge of our property? Does it change? Does it change? And if so, does it benefit us or does it hurt us? That's what I want to know.
So a couple of thoughts that I have, and there might be some others that have some thoughts. One, I would look back at the ordinances for the zoning of what you're in right now, which is the R18 zone. So if I'm looking at that, and I don't have it up in front of me, but I would look at that and see if there's any type of stipulations, just like in the subject property, that talk about adjacent zones and what buffering might change. You're already up against the RM15 zone. So for that to change in that lane, it would seem odd for that, but I would refer you to city staff to clarify that question, because I don't have a definitive answer for you.
So I know we're against it on the back, but there's also when that was subdivided, because the person who owns that little peninsula used to own the lot that we now have, and he sold it off. But where they divided it, there was an existing garage in that corner.
Yeah.
And there's not any buffering really between that current line and the
Any-
garage in how they did it. But
The existing structure would automatically be grandfathered in.
Right.
Because it's there. So
But my concern is if we needed to add, like right now, there's not say a driveway or anything that's up to that. It's all dirt. And at that, something that we may need to develop at some point. So that's why I want to know how it affects that. Is it going to make it so we can't do something we want to do or something like that? And then the same down along Jenny Lane. If we have so much setback or stuff that we have to do, already being a corner lot, we've got setback on maybe two sides that affect us. And I don't know if it changes that. That's what I'm looking for.
it's a great question. I do think I understand it. I don't have a great answer, other than we do have an answer in the city ordinances.
Right.
And it's just a matter of referring you there to see what the setbacks are against adjacent zones. I don't have that in front of me right now, but we could look that up.
Okay. And just if you consider the possibilities of problems there and when you're looking at this and making your decisions, then I appreciate that.
Thank you. Is it Dustin or
Dustin,
Justin?
yes.
Dustin. Thank you, Dustin.
So it's this property that's just up here off this way and back this way.
Can I approach it and get my head straight
You sure
on
can.
this map on my phone? Which piece are we talking about? This one? This is what we call Jenny Lane.
Right, it's this piece, so Jenny Lane's part of it, this piece right here
Yeah.
that juts out. And then it comes back this way into the detention basin.
Yeah.
Is that, so it comes both sides of Jenny Lane. So behind the Stiegelmeyer. The public hearing is still open. If anyone else would like to offer any thoughts, please step forward to the microphone.
Hi, I'm Darren Stegelmeyer. Good to meet you guys. We've not met in person before. So the little, I don't know if we're calling it a peninsula, which part we're calling it a peninsula and the ocean here. So, but my understanding is this zoning ended up being awkward like this because of some changes that were made by a developer in the late 90s. And that was about the time that I owned the property behind, well, I own 690 North and the property behind it. Those lots were already created as well as the zoning was done before the zoning was completed before I ever lived there. My understanding, there was some kind of a trade, horse trade of zoning for R15 somewhere else, RM15 somewhere else and this, and that made this kind of awkward. I think for most people, it probably isn't very consequential in the sense of there's a retention pond between that kind of stick out part on the north and 664 and 690, that retention pond there. What we want to do is we want to be able to make the best use of making a landscape buffer, as well as to be able to build a set of apartments right there, such that we don't build just a real narrow set of apartments, but so that we can go closer to that. So because it's a different zone, it creates a little bit of challenge for us. And really forces us to not have what I'm going to say is as aesthetic of a fourplex as we would be able to there, including a landscape buffer between us and our neighbors. And so we want to be able to create a real, beautiful landscape buffer there between us. It pinches us a little bit if we have to fit those setbacks, which if I think on the side lot, it's 25, I think on the side lots, if I'm remembering the ordinance right. I should have brought my computer because I had it all documented in there. So it's just interesting to me of how that ended in being an inconsistent space there. My understanding, it was some kind of a horse trade of zoning that was done. How it actually happened in the late
Understanding's
90s.
accurate.
What's that?
Your understanding's accurate.
Okay. And we go back to the late 90s, whatever happened there. At some level, we'd like to do a better job just for, I'm going to say, all of the city residents, our neighbors, the people that will be there, by being able to not step back from that. It's kind of a hillside and that retention pond. And this was a potential, and that is just get this zoning so it's not so inconsistent. Not only do you have if we want to call it a peninsula there, but we have an island sitting in there that's like, how did we end up with an island right in the middle of the back of that? So that to me would be some consideration to put into it. We would like to just be able to create the most aesthetically pleasing to our neighbors, pleasing to the residents that will live in that apartment. And it will also have a lower impact if we don't have to have a 25-foot strip of grass or something in there. We're not going to have to water 25 feet of grass. So that's a benefit if you think of just water use and things like that. So
just for my clarification, if you don't mind, the property that you're talking about wanting to put this complex on is the one immediately behind 690.
just to the north east of 690.
Okay.
Yep.
On the other side of the well.
No, that's the retention pond
Okay, but is this the 2.35 acres we're talking about?
for rezoning.
Yeah.
I believe it's all of
Yeah,
this
it's all of
area.
that.
It's all of that area. Yeah.
But understand, it was just the city said, hey, we should fix this. It wasn't me that put a zoning request in. What we would like to do is just not have to have a 25-foot setback on this property here. So this is our property that we're planning to build a fourplex.
So you already own this RM 15.
That is correct.
This is what you're looking to, you want the rezone here and over here. This is-
The city just said, hey, we got to fix this zoning. So
This is the road.
I really have no interest in these properties other than I want to be a good neighbor and I want to make this area look aesthetically pleasing. And I also want to have, lower impact on, if I have to have a 25-foot setback, I have to figure out how to landscape it or make it beautiful so that it's aesthetically pleasing.
So
So you would want to build on this piece.
No,
No, that
we're
one.
building right here.
That one.
And our interest is not to have a 25-foot setback, but if it's an adjacent zone, we can go up to 10 feet.
That's primarily what you want to.
I'm interested if that's possible. At the
What
same
about
time,
over here?
no concern at all. I mean, when I say no concern, I think the only reason we'll call this part a hammer that creates this peninsula and this island. Why this hammer exists was, I'm gonna call it some interesting shenanigans in the night.
Is it?
This part right here,
Is this buildable?
No, I don't think so. It's really steep and rugged, isn't it?
so
this is a retention pond right here.
Yeah.
That's already
if I may just pull it back in just to clarify.
I'm sorry,
a
by
couple
the
of
way, I
things. You're
apologize.
good. You're good.
You want me here or there?
Here, just so it can get into the mic.
And my understanding is there's a gas line that
Record
goes
these
through
things.
there too.
And there could be people watching online.
Oh,
Essentially, he wants the zone change for us, so he.
Hi, guys.
Just to be consistent.
Just to be consistent.
It's already zoned RM15. You already own the property. With or without this change, you could build whatever multifamily complex you could fit on there. And your
That is correct.
contention is that the aesthetic of the project that you envision is better if you don't have to deal with as restrictive of a buffer because of the adjacent zoning.
Yeah, and it's really just that buffer between those, because the adjacent zone is R18. The setback, I think, if I've got the ordinance correct, is 25 feet, where if it was the same adjacent zone, the setback would only be 10 feet. Gives us more space to have adequate parking as well as to create a great landscape buffer between us and our neighbors. And I think will make the whole area much more aesthetically pleasing. It does provide flexibility as opposed to making it a 30-foot depth to making it closer to a 40-foot depth of a building. So,
Despite the meandering path we've taken to understand this, I think we're there, but.
okay.
Mr. London.
Mr. Chair, may I ask another question? May I approach, I apologize last time. for
You
kinda
can, you've got a mic.
Okay, so, all right, so because this may come to city council, I want to be clear here. You're requesting a zone change for this whole piece of property. But in reality, what you really want is just this zone change so that you have a little more buffer right in here. Is that
Less
correct?
buffer.
Is, yeah,
Less required.
Yeah,
Less
yeah,
setback
is that correct?
requirements.
That is my interest. And it really should have, I'm gonna say minimal impact to anyone else there because it is a retention pond and, well, this is and I'm gonna go over here and draw on it. The thing I forgot to mention is that this entire route right here,
Has an easement.
what makes it unbuildable is the
Gas line.
Gas line.
right away.
Yep.
So the gas right away makes it unbuildable in the sense of, until we all run on alternative fuels other than natural gas in our homes. It's really unbuildable.
So to your point, Chair, you could actually build on that right now, but just wouldn't be as aesthetically pleasing,
In
correct?
the piece that
Yeah,
he's got
yeah,
that's zoned
yeah.
R15. Yeah, he could.
Yeah.
It just requires a wider buffer,
Buffer.
which gives him less flexibility in how to arrange his landscaping.
So kind of aesthetics.
The landscaping, the majority of the landscaping would have to be in the back adjacent to that
Right.
vacant piece of property that can't be built on,
Okay,
So for
rather
example,
than out in the
aesthetics,
front adjacent, closer to the homes and so on.
thank you. I'm a little clearer myself.
We're getting there.
so for example, aesthetics would include, we'll probably end up building taller. We wanted to make it so there would be parking underneath the buildings, but we might not be able to do that because we need to have parking in front. And so it might turn in front of, instead of a, I'm gonna say a little bit nicer fourplex that would look more like a townhome with a garage underneath, it might just be a fourplex because we wouldn't have that latitude to maybe park underneath. Just because we'd have to use that for square footage for apartments. So it gives us a little bit better footprint to fit in 4 apartments as opposed to kind of crunching that down. And I think it makes it a nicer residence for people of the community. So there's reasons for us. At the same time, the city was like saying, well, this zoning doesn't make sense. Let's fix it. And so it really wasn't my request to change the zoning. I have interest in it. At the same time, I want to respect, there's really not, because of the right of way, there's really not any additional building that would happen. And I guess I'm not sure exactly what lines were there. If I saw a map on the iPad over here, I don't know why the road would be rezoned.
Yeah, I'm not
But,
sure either.
I don't think the road should be included in it, but I don't know reasons why, from a city planning perspective, it's good or bad to have the road rezoned.
I don't either.
Line could easily be drawn, just straight across that future right of way line right there, so that it's just almost a straight line there for the RM15 between that and the R18 lower down.
Yeah, if the request were changed to a smaller section, just that piece in between 664 and 690 and nothing to the right side of the hammer, would that require an additional public hearing or could we?
That's what you could recommend.
As part of
here.
this deliberation, we could recommend rezoning that section only and
Yeah.
not the road and not the other pieces.
Yeah, I think you could make that recommendation. I will say that I was not involved in the discussion when the city staff determined that they wanted to see all of that. And I understand their motivation, which was to just clean up the zoning so that you're not leaving a lot of little pockets and islands of different zoning right there. So, I mean, it makes sense to do that. For the project they're proposing, it's not necessary. They would probably do fine with just that one piece up there being rezoned. But the city staff, I think, decided or determined that it would probably make more sense just to rezone more of that property so that we don't have a lot of islands. As to going all the way down that right of way, again, I think it's just determination because that property wasn't going to be used for anything else. But I don't really see that it would hurt to keep that R18, particularly since the one owner was here saying, that might affect what he can do with his property in the future there if that gets changed alongside his property.
Yeah, since it's a frontage of a street, I don't know what the setback is a street versus the setback from a, call it a side lot of a zone.
Yeah.
It's probably, I would guess setback from the street's the same amount or maybe more.
Well, it might be determined, it could be considered a side yard, but for a corner lot, which may also still be substantial. It may still require the 20 feet. I'd have to look at
We'd
the
have to look at
code.
the ordinance, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other comments from the public?
Based on that conversation. So if including that road is going to positively impact us based on what we want to do in the future and what we want to do, and we've had discussions with the city on this numerous times, is subdivide our property. And we've been waiting for the development to happen, and it's happening slowly. But we want to put that application in fairly soon, officially. And because now we have that road there, which will be handed over to the city soon, and utilities up that street, it certainly has made a positive impact on our development plans to cut that property in half. So the frontage to the rear property would be on Jenny Lane. So we have 2/3 of an acre there, and our current house sits on the front part of that lot. And so
Lot we're talking about.
we're on the corner there,
Here, the corner,
Mhm.
okay.
the big lot
Got it.
just in front of Darren's. So that's our future plans for that. So if that road is to be included in the rezoning or not, we would support something that would benefit us in our development plans for setbacks, particularly, which of course what Darren is saying, what he supports, particularly for the setbacks. So that's something that I wanted to bring up because we want to make that look more aesthetically pleasing too. It looks like a dog's breakfast right now. And we've had nothing but just catastrophes we've had to replace our entire water main line, lots of digging. We've had the side problems going on. So we want to turn that from the dog's breakfast that it looks like into 2 beautiful homes. We want to renovate our current home and make that look very nice as well. So that's our future plans, and we want to get that done in the next couple of years maximum. So anything that's going to benefit us to help lift that area, that's our position. Thank you.
So I did just look it up. The side yard for a corner lot on adjacent to a street, if and when that becomes a street, is the same distance as if that were zoned R1, RM15. It's 25 feet both ways.
Okay.
So it doesn't make a
No
difference.
impact.
Yeah.
Thank you. Public hearing is still open. If anyone else would like to approach the microphone. Seeing no other comments at the moment, I'd entertain a motion to close. Is it interactive online right now?
The only person that's online is Steve Gardner.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Thank you. Do we have a second on the motion?
I'll second that.
Justin, let's go ahead and vote on that. All in favor? The public hearing is now closed. I want to thank you all for attending. First of all, we will deliberate as a commission and continue to discuss this particular petition. But thank you for your interest in what's going on and being part of the process. So thank you. That being said, as a commission, let's open it up for any conversation, discussion you may have in regards to this.
Okay, I've maybe got a question, maybe Wilf can help us out. So a front yard setback, if 690 was subdivided and divided into 2 lots, a front yard buffer to a road that was zoned RM15, does that have any change? Is there landscaping requirements that would have to be part of that front yard, that if the road remained R18, that would not be part of that, or
Yeah, no,
the
it
side,
Doesn't
or
look
the-
like it would be different.
or the side? I know there's some rules for that buffer with vegetation and stuff, but whereas a side yard to a 4-plex, it doesn't affect that. And then you look over at 650 and an existing home and garage, does to have a little narrow sliver of the back of 650 now jotting up into the middle of a bunch of RM15.
But-
Do we see any issues there?
I don't,
I mean,
no.
even in the future,
even if they split that into another lot.
It-
Yeah, it doesn't seem to make a difference. Because of the landscape buffering would be required of the property that's in the RM15 zone and not the property that's in the R18. So if you had the RM15 property, it has to provide that 25 feet of buffered landscaping adjacent to an R18 zone, but not the other way around. So if that 690 address is still in the R18 zone, their side yards and setbacks are all still going to be the same.
Any other questions, thoughts about this project?
Yeah, I'm a little confused procedurally. If the city's the applicant, and as in the past, we have recommended a disfavorable action, the city then can overturn it. If they're the applicant, how does that work?
Well, I mean, so the city is actually proposing to change the zoning. And I guess you could say that the city is the city council. But they can take no land use action without getting a recommendation from the planning commission first. So you do have to provide them a recommendation on
Either
what to
way.
do about rezoning that property.
And just thinking about that, so I thought the comment about 650 is a good one, because that if this change happens, 650 is going to be kind of sticking up as into this area as the lone R18 in that island of RM15. If we cut out Jenny Lane and you went down on the border, the bottom part of the Stiegelmeyer property, and then across the road there, we could make a recommendation like that, where not all of Jenny Lane coming clear down to 700 East would be included.
You could, yeah. And in some ways that makes sense. It just makes for a cleaner line. But as I looked at the impact on the regulations, it doesn't make any impact.
Doesn't change the adjacent land uses.
Not for 650 or for 690. Doesn't change what they're able to do.
So any of the adjacent landowners that have a vested interest in their property rights, it doesn't change their value of that property.
Or the ability of what they can do there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Other clarifications, questions?
Yeah, I got a follow-up just to that one, Will. So if, let's say that 650 down the road wanted to subdivide their property, now they could put they could put a multi-unit dwelling there.
Oh, you mean if that were rezoned, that upper
Right.
portion of it? Yeah, it's based on how much property they have, but
Sure.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
So that could be more valuable to them
sure.
potentially.
650 is 4/10 of an acre.
It's pretty small.
I don't think you could cut off.
Well, and
Put another lot off of that.
it's not in the current scope to change. I mean, we could make that recommendation too, I suppose, but
On 650.
Somebody made the comment, oh, that they'll never build there. That's what I was told would happen to my house next door, or the lot next door to me. Nobody can ever build there. I'd moved in about a year later. Now there's a house there.
Still not.
So developer will find a way to put a house on anything if they can make $1. I don't know. So I don't know if we can say that, oh, that's unbuildable. Like I say, they got out there with a tape measure and by the inches, and then asked me to trade some land so they could get into the third car garage. Kind of a similar situation here. I mean, I don't know.
please do.
On the proposal to change that to RM15, and Wolf, you said it wouldn't impact other than Darren's property,
Which one is that?
the above, the piece, the triangle.
Oh, yeah. What that does is that right now
There you go.
right now with the zoning the way it is, they would have to provide a 25-foot landscape buffer on this side of the property because it's adjacent to the R18 zoning. But if that's RM15, they only have to do a regular 10-foot setback instead of 25 feet. So that's the difference that it makes.
And that piece that is above there, that's in the that one. Well, that little triangle,
Yeah,
that is,
that's part of this lot, I think, is 664, right?
where's the retention pond?
It's actually not part of the lot. This is a retention
Oh,
pond.
okay.
And it has, going deep underneath it, the gas line.
Mhm.
So if you were to drive up Jenny Lane right now, right now it doesn't look right because it's paved now.
Right.
It's a good sized retention pond there for stormwater. And I'm not sure if I'm supposed to even comment during this section, so.
Okay.
What's that?
You're okay.
It's not quite public, but it. So what I'm having a hard time understanding is what the best for Darren and the best for the neighbors along that property is to leave it alone or to RM 15.
So if he has to provide 25 feet of landscape buffer here and 25 feet here, really presses him in there and he doesn't have a lot of options of what to do. But if he doesn't have to do the 25 back here, only 10 feet, he's got more options of how he can arrange his property there and put better landscaping, more landscaping on the side that's adjacent to the road and to the residents.
But if nothing changed, he still has enough property there to do a project.
Yeah, I think, yeah, he's got enough property. The question is how he has to arrange the landscaping.
Right.
How is having a smaller buffer arranged for more landscaping?
Not
More building.
not more landscaping in that location. It gives them more flexibility on how to arrange the landscaping, other landscaping elsewhere on the property. If he gets squeezed down to here, he's pretty limited on what he can do here and here. But if he has more ability to move the building that way, he has more options to do things down here.
The retention pond.
And you access that piece of property off of Denny Lane?
Correct.
Okay.
He actually gives the new 690 subdivided property you do more space potential.
Or more buffer, yeah.
More buffer, more aesthetics. We not only, I believe if I read the ordinance correct, not only do we need a landscape buffer, but we also need a privacy fence between us and their property. But it will just look better having more trees and more in-depth trees, if you will, as opposed to one single line of trees and getting in there for the parking. So it gives us some flexibility to have more parking. And just makes the whole project more aesthetic pleasing. I didn't bring, we have two alternate drawings of what we're looking to put together. And you can see that on those drawings very well, the benefit of doing that.
I think the bottom line, really what it boils down to is rather than having 25 feet of landscape buffering adjacent to a detention pond where there's nobody, you'll only have 10 feet and you'll have more elsewhere where it might provide more benefit to other existing homes in the street.
Because it's next to a retention pond, I mean, who's it gonna?
Right.
Who's it gonna affect?
So thank you, Mr. London. You had one more comment.
Yeah, so I think you answered this off, Wilf, already. So the piece, which I would say is the sort of southwest piece, the square there. Well, I'll point it out here real quick. So this piece right here, you mentioned earlier, because of the gas line that comes through there and the geography, that's pretty much a moot
Unbuildable,
point. It's unbuildable.
pretty much. It'd be really tough to put anything there.
Whether that be single family or RM 15.
So as a commission, what we're deliberating is which recommendation to make to the city council. And as we consider this, we need to be looking at what's a consistent use as far as what's being proposed versus the general plan. What are the adjacent uses? Is that consistent? Does it make sense and fit the environment as we make this recommendation? So that's the question before us right now. My thinking is the project can go forward either way, and it feels like a better project without negatively impacting any of the property owners. It feels like we get a better project with the change happening and no downside. So that's kind of how I'm seeing this, just hearing. Now that's my perspective. I want to hear other perspectives as to, shoot some holes in now. What am I missing?
I think the young lady there suggested some potentials with her concerns. She talked about increased traffic, reduced safety, increased density. And, you know, personally, I think the fact that we're going to build homes up above that really shoots most of that. You know, you're going to get increased traffic from the development up above anyways, and you're going to get reduced safety on that roads for those kids anyways. And so I sympathize with those concerns, but I'm not sure that just limiting where that building can sit on that lot is really going to affect those things. So I'd like to be sympathetic for those things, but you know, I don't feel like that's really going to be affected or not.
Okay.
Well, I think the developer said that would change how he puts his parking. So goes to her point. If he changes the parking on site, then we're like, now they're gonna park on the street, and that was her concern.
Now, I have a question about that though, because I thought in this neighborhood that there was no parking on the street allowed, period. Now, it doesn't mean that people won't do it, but it's prohibited. Is that accurate?
No.
It's
Well,
not.
one thing that we did clean up, and I don't know if this is grandfathered or not, but we had them make, what is it, Lance, 25-foot minimum driveway, so they didn't park on the roads like in some of those.
That was a whole different development than this. This is single family. It's always had the 25-foot homes.
But no, this is RM
But
15.
But
where
the
he's building,
single,
right?
The lane though, is it the standard road width or is it
I
the mahogany?
have
road?
No, the road width is the same. What he's talking about with the shorter driveways, that was fixed, but that's only in the Quail Hollow Phase 2 area. This is all a 25-foot setback. Everything on the hill is that 25-foot setback.
Okay.
So if I could just help maybe clear this up just a little bit, I did a little math. Near as I can tell, the frontage of this lot is about 110 feet. With this zone change, it gives them 75 feet of usable space to set their parking. They're still going to have the same landscape buffer between the Greenwells and Finlansons, but behind it'll free up 15 feet. So with the zone change, they have 75 feet to do their development that they can do either way. Without the zone change, they have 60 feet, if I'm doing my math correct. So basically this zone change is giving them an extra 15 feet to do the project that they can do either way. So you're talking the detention basins with those gas lines in any of our lifetimes, those gas lines aren't going away, you know, that they're going to, and even then it's a detention basin. You're not going to be able to build something in that detention basin. I do question having the road be zoned the RM15 just because we're always talking about not having the islands and stuff, but I feel that having the road either way or a funny little jog in it, whether we drew the line behind the Stegelmeyers over straight, you've still got a little peninsula. I don't see that it really affects that there's going to be a difference in their landscaping in the front yard if they subdivide versus the road being RM15 or R18. I don't see that changes anything. And 650, if the day comes that, which we're not, that they tear the house and the garage, I don't really feel that the zone of the road is going to affect that property in the future either.
Other comments on this?
I can make a motion.
I'll entertain it. Go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we make a positive recommendation to the city council on the proposed rezone from R18 to RM15, the subject property.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second on the motion? Thank you. Discussion on the motion before we vote.
Who owns this, the right of the hammerhead, if you will?
Get that pulled up still.
You asked who owns the land in the retention pond?
Well, the right side of the hammerhead, so.
The
Morgan,
northeast of 636.
NA Morgan Development
Morgan
LLC.
Development LLC.
Which I think is the Wall Brothers.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think you're absolutely right.
So I guess the question I would have for Jay, is this proposal include that, or is that out, or are you just talking between 690?
As submitted, as submitted.
So if you'll scroll down to show what's outlined, but it's the whole hammerhead, I think. There's a different, back in the packet. Yeah, right there. So everything outlined in red's what he proposed in his motion.
My hunch is that has something to do with the parcel. If it's a 2.35 acre parcel, I'm assuming the red outline is just the parcel itself. So it has probably nothing to do with somebody thinking about where should the line be, as opposed to it just being, well, that's what the property is, right?
No, it's not one parcel. They're on a map, you can see the one detention basin on the left above the Stegelmeyer property is actually owned by Valley Vista Estates Phase One lot owners. If my map is correct, and the other side is NA Morgan Development LLC.
I
And
see.
the
So I agree it is, since it's not one parcel that's 2.35, seems arbitrary that it's those lines, right?
Yeah, it's just, that's the area that is being recommended.
It cleans up the gap.
It cleans up that hole.
It might be worth pointing out that this proposal does not rezone the back part of that 650 property.
Correct.
It leaves that out.
Any other discussion on the
Yeah, that
motion
long, narrow piece.
before we vote? And again, the motion on the table is a favorable recommendation to the city council as requested in the application. Any final thoughts? Let's vote. All in favor of the motion as outlined? It's unanimous. Motion passes. Thank you. We will move to our second agenda item. Let me just scroll back up to the agenda here. We will turn the time over to Wilf for this part of the agenda. Last month, we reviewed the conditional use ordinance and we asked Wilf to redline some of this. We've gone through that. We have that in front of us. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to review those recommendations. But Wilf, if you'll take us through that. And before you get started, again, just one more thank you to those that participated in the public process. Appreciate that. You're welcome to stay or go. Go ahead, Wilf.
We talked a little bit in the last meeting about the need to make some changes to the conditional use chapter and look at some of the provisions in there. And then I've done a lot to the procedures, but haven't really addressed very much the specific conditions, which is something, you all may want to take a little bit of time after today's meeting, and we'll talk a little bit about it here, but review those and think about that a little bit, because we may need to make some adjustments there as well. But just to go over the changes that are outlined in here to the procedure and the process. We've moved some things around so that it's a little bit more consistent and organizationally kind of follows in an order. And then I want to point out to you some of the strikeouts that you see there. the language is not gone. It's just been moved to another location or to another section or created a new section. So a lot of that language is still there, even though it's been shown as being crossed out, but not all of it. And we'll talk about a little bit of what has been changed. So we first, of course, say what the purpose is and then what it is and how someone makes an application and then what the procedure is and the fee that's required. Now, what I wanted to talk to you, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, I did not make any changes to this part, but that's 10.26.030, which is the notification of a conditional use. This requires that there be notification made in a newspaper of general circulation with the consideration of the meeting. It does, in here, it doesn't specifically require notification of adjacent property owners. And, you know, that's one consideration. Another consideration is whether you want to, I mean, it just says that there's supposed to be a notice given that you're going to consider it. It doesn't require that you hold a public hearing on the conditional use application. So that's maybe something to think about and look at a little bit. From an administrative standpoint, administrative items, which is what a conditional use is in state code, are not required to have public hearings. Many jurisdictions do still require them because they feel like the public should be allowed the opportunity to come and speak to items that they may have some concern or some interest about. And if not the public generally, it may be at least the adjacent property owners, or at the very least that the adjacent property owners are notified that something's going to happen next door to them so that they're just aware of it. So that's something to think about. How do you want to do the notifications? To whom? Doing the notification in a newspaper of general circulation, I don't know what that really accomplishes, because you already are required to publish notification of your agenda. And so if you're going to consider a conditional use application, it's going to be on your agenda, which you provide the notice of. Do you publish your agendas, your notifications of meetings in the paper? You don't. So you're posting and do it online.
But we have local, is the Morgan County paper. And so we do the public notice website and our city website.
Okay. Which is what you're allowed to do by state code. So at the very least, this section of the code ought to be changed because it does require that you have to publish it in the newspaper. State code no longer requires that. And quite frankly, I think that's of limited value anyway. Right. Most people either they see the notice at City Hall or someplace, or they look at it online, or they hear about it from somewhere. A lot of places require posting of property. You know, but I don't, do you require that here? Do you do that here, that you post a notice in front of properties with applications? Okay.
County does.
So we don't have to worry about that part of it.
Seems effective though.
So that maybe is something we ought to discuss a little bit. You know, what purpose this section serves and how it ought to be changed. It's possible, I think you could just eliminate it altogether, because all it really requires as written is that you publish a notification that you're going to hold a meeting. It doesn't even say a hearing about this application. You already do that with posting or publishing your agenda. So I don't see the need for a separate requirement for doing that here.
I agree with that. That seems consistent with everything else you've outlined. Now, one thought though is, you heard me mention, I do like posting something actually on the property. So the
And
people
many
that are
places do
nearby
that.
and drive, you can see it. If you care and it impacts you, you'll know, because
Mhm.
there's a sign up, as opposed to, you know, sending out mailers or, you know, putting it in the city offices somewhere. That to me is the most effective way to let people that might have some concern know. Other than that, I think we could take this out.
I did try to look in your ordinance to see if for administrative items you're required to hold public hearings. And I didn't see that either. I didn't see that there's a requirement to do that. So generally, it's not required in state code. This is a touchy issue because many jurisdictions and many people feel like that the public ought to be able to come and have the right to speak to an item that you're considering, whether it's legislative or administrative. For legislative items like a rezone, like what you did tonight, or your general plan changes or amendments, or if you're going to change something in your zoning code, you're required to hold a public hearing. And, quite frankly, when the public comes, they give you their opinion. And for legislative items, that's entirely appropriate because you want to get a feel for what the people think about what you're thinking about doing or what's being proposed. For administrative items, most people don't understand that administrative items that's where you're taking an application and reviewing it to see if it conforms with your ordinance. In that case, opinion doesn't really matter much. It's whether it conforms with the ordinance or not. And so that's really one of the reasons why I think that a requirement for public hearing is not in the state code. And some places don't hold public hearings for administrative items. So that's something, you may want to think about. As I look at your ordinance, you're not required to hold public hearings for administrative items. So in that case, at this point, I wouldn't touch that, leave that alone. And I would probably take this part out here as well about the notification for conditional uses because you're already providing that notification with publishing your agenda or posting your agendas. So given that being the case, just I would leave that unless you feel strongly that there ought to be something different that you require there.
Conditional use, of course, is administrative.
Yes, it is.
I'm not sure we've ever had public hearings on conditional use. I don't think we've ever done it.
Okay.
I don't recall.
All right. I would say then let's just leave it alone. I think we take this paragraph 30 out.
I think we have had, haven't we?
It wouldn't surprise me if you had. Many places do.
I can respond to that.
State Street. Oh, Steve will recall. He'll refresh my
Steve.
memory.
Go ahead, Steve. You're up.
Yes, we have not done public hearings on conditional use permits. We've had public meetings and have oft-time allowed public comment as we address what conditions may need to be imposed to mitigate any negative impacts, but we have never considered them to be formal public hearings.
Yeah. And that's great. Then I would leave that alone in your ordinance.
I kind of like that too. If we're opening up and listening to opinions and it doesn't impact what we can do because it's administrative, then it almost just upsets people more.
Well, yeah. Conversely, they seem to get upset too when they don't get a chance to address something that they feel about. But at a public meeting, you can allow people to speak. It's just that you're not required to let them speak as you are with a public hearing.
Understood.
So you still have that availability or that option to do that.
Will fight?
Home business applications. I know we've had people speak.
Oh, you got your mute thing.
On a couple of the home businesses, we've had a couple people speak on it, but it sounds like it was a public meeting, not a public hearing.
Yeah.
So a question, Will, when we've discussed this in city council the last month. So Gary Crane, I think city council was pretty unaware of this, but we're only required even on a zone change or a general plan change. According to Gary, there's only the need for one public hearing.
Yeah.
Which would take place in the planning meeting.
Right.
And the city council does not need to hold another public.
They're not
hearing.
required by state code to do so.
Yeah. And
So as an example, even for that thing we just did with the rezone, would the city council have to have another public hearing
No.
for that?
No.
This one.
Well,
covers-
We
I
have,
think your current ordinance does require it. So until this gets changed, your council does have to have that.
But
public
state
hearing.
code doesn't require it.
State code
It's
doesn't
what
require
we've
it.
chosen
Well,
to do in this
I'm not sure we
jurisdiction.
were aware of that till our counselor brought that up. So,
He's aware of this ordinance.
Yeah.
so Steve, will the city council have to have a public hearing on this recommendation that was proposed tonight
Yes.
Yes.
until we what? Until we change?
So you
our
change
ordinance?
this ordinance.
Yeah, the ordinance is a draft, but yeah, we discussed this quite some time ago and the council felt like they wanted to go ahead and hear that. But I mean, but that's, you're the council, you have the option to change your mind. And I think that's completely appropriate.
Yeah, I think Gary's comments were that a lot of times when it got to the city council, it was essentially a rehash that had been discussed and vetted pretty thoroughly at the planning meeting, public hearing. And so,
Correct. Yeah, sometimes they just use the planning commission as a warm up for you folks.
yeah, yep.
Yeah. Well, and
So,
I'll tell you my experience at Salt Lake City and some other places was we'd have public hearings that were required for these kinds of items at the planning commission. And you'd get a few people that showed up. Where they'd really come out was at the city council meeting. Because they felt like that the planning commission, like Steve just said, that was the warm up. That wasn't the main event. The main event was the council meeting, and that's where they would show up.
well, the thing that's difficult from a city council standpoint is if you would have your public hearing at the planning meeting at your level, then they would come to the planning meeting at city council. And you'd hear a whole nother barrage of items were
Mhm.
brought
That
up
weren't
that
considered.
that you guys weren't even discussing or weren't even brought up before your body. So
Yep.
as a city council member, it was frustrating actually, because now you begin to hear a bunch of things topics and items,
What would have been good to know earlier.
yeah, like 2 weeks ago, so.
That's because we're not elected and you guys are.
Yeah, Steve made a real good comment. You guys just warmed them up, so.
And maybe their neighbors told them about it.
I'm
Hey,
sure.
This is coming on and
Yep.
Or fired them up if they didn't like our recommendation.
Right.
Yeah.
So my comment is do we want to avoid that? I'm fairly new at this elected thing. We're doing like
I guess one of the questions would be, would you still have the prerogative to have one if you wanted to, or now you have to? If we remove it, can you still have one if you wanted to, if it was that?
yeah.
I'll let Steve address that. I think, it's obviously what you're going to be doing is in a public meeting. And you can
Correct.
allow the public to comment in a public meeting. It's just not required.
Exactly. And that's on our agenda. Every city council meeting is public comment. So, and that was what Gary brought up as well, is they still have an ability to get up in city council meeting and express an opinion. It's just not a public hearing. It's a public comment.
Get rid of the
So-
formality,
Yeah.
the formal part of it.
Not-
They need to understand it, right? They need to understand that it's just a meeting, not a hearing. Well, the man that controls that is sitting right next to me.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Mhm.
That's correct. It really
He has a gavel and
devolves to the chair or to the mayor in the case of the council, whoever's running the meeting.
Well, I think everybody's had a personal experience where a decision of a commission or a council affects them. And maybe I'm a glutton for punishment kind of guy, but I kind of like to hear what people's thoughts are.
Like tonight, if this was the audience, we'd have to have a public hearing to nobody because it's on the books.
Yeah,
And we've done that before.
I know, that's what I mean.
sure. Yeah, it happens
Open and close.
a fair amount. I'll tell you this, that there are some jurisdictions, I'd say a number of jurisdictions around the state where they do require having public hearings in front of the city council because they're elected officials and they pretty well have determined that if they don't allow the public their ability to come speak on these issues, they might not get reelected the next go around. That still doesn't though. I mean, whether you require the public hearing to be heard or not, you can still allow public comment. Even if it's not a required public hearing, the mayor can say, well, we want to hear from some of these folks.
And we
Let's
have it
go
on
ahead
our-
and get some comment.
And we have it on our agenda every meeting.
That's just as effective, correct?
Sure.
Comment.
If you allow it, right?
Yeah, if you
can shut
allow
it down if it's getting out of control. And but here's it makes no difference to me as a commission member, whether or not the city council holds a separate public hearing. Unless new information is revealed. And that's the one that for me, if that means there's only one forum for people to share their thoughts and that can help influence, some of the things that we should be considering, I'd like to hear that.
But the problem with that is that you're not going to get that opportunity to hear those new thoughts because your public hearing was 2 weeks ago. The new information is presented to the city council. And it's out of your hands. You know what I'm saying? So it creates sort of a difficult situation if you're sitting as a member of the city council, because now you're privy to information that you certainly probably should have heard. But in the 2 weeks, people have thought, okay, now I've got another idea, or I've got another thought or another comment I want to make. So it's kind of, it's an interesting dynamic to say the least.
It is. And as a council though, if you felt like that were the case, you'd always have the option to say, let's send this back to the planning commission so they can hear this information and give us whatever recommendation they think now after hearing about this.
And I don't think we've ever done that, but that's a good
But you
point.
could do that.
That is that is allowable.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was actually going to be my question, if
That's
they ever
interesting.
felt something that Tony and Mayor thought, whoa, this is a whole bunch of stuff we didn't hear. Let's send it back. You guys got to go tell the planning commission this. My other question is, in a city council meeting, is there any difference between your public hearing and your public comment period on the mayor's ability to say, we're just going around and around and around on this, public comment closed versus public hearing closed? Does that
But
make
with-
sense? Can you kind of shut off that over and over and over, rehashing it
Yeah.
easier in public comment than you can public hearing? Because sometimes that's how it goes. You end up with 10 people with the exact same thing. Can you say, okay, public comment closed easier than public hearing?
Yeah, I'll give you my
Closed.
take on it, and then I'll let Steve comment on this as well, being the legal counsel. But with a public hearing, you really have to allow anyone who wants to speak their opportunity to speak. You can try to guide them. You can say, if you're going to say something we've already heard, please, try not to say it again or something. But basically, people have the right to come up and speak because it's a public hearing and they're members of the public. With a public comment or a public meeting, and you're allowing the public to comment, you pretty much have control about how you're going to allow that to happen and when it's going to happen and when you're going to cut it off. And, if you feel like, as you say, all right, everybody's getting up now and just saying the same thing over and over again, I think we've heard enough, and just end it. And I think you have the ability to do that in a public meeting, whereas you might not have that ability in a public hearing.
And Gary Crane made a good point. He said, the mayor also has the ability in a public hearing or in a public comment at some point to say, okay, basically, we get it. You're concerned about adding students to the school. We've heard that 10 times. Okay, noted. So let's, we really don't need to have somebody else get up and comment on that. I just use that as an example, by the way. So,
Wrong with that, what I just said there, Steve, or?
No, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, you can control either one of them. Sure. I mean, you need to be a little bit more careful in the public hearing, because indeed that's what it is. And I think that as long as the record showed that you had been more than patient as far as having the issues heard and the people talk, but you are right. You have more discretion to shut down just a public meeting quicker. The comments in a public meeting, I should say.
Okay, and then maybe one more thing. I know Denise, last week we were talking about, someone had called with a concern and I wanted to go to the city council with, and you directed me to have them go to the website and do a comment card type thing. So is that required for public comment, or someone can just walk in even if they don't go online and do the comment card and stuff? So it's,
Someone could just walk in. What the comment does to help the council is I receive that, then when I make the packet, I put that into the packet, so each of the council has an idea beforehand of what someone is coming to speak to them about. There's also comment cards that we have on the table or here at my desk, that if someone came in and wanted to make a comment, I would just give them the card, ask them to fill it out, and then we would address it.
okay, so you're not going to disqualify someone from the public comment versus public hearing. Okay.
Okay. I think what we'll do is we'll take that section out then and kind of leave things the way they are. And I think on your next agenda, you're going to have a proposal here about public hearings versus public meetings for the council. So that issue can be addressed separately, I think, at that point. If we go now to paragraph 040, and for some reason it wouldn't let me put the 0 in front of the 4 in there when I did that red highlight one. But I've just kind of reorganized that and put the determination about how the planning commission is determined by the conditional use applications are determined by the planning commission acting as the designated land use authority, which is what administrative decisions are made by what's called the land use authority. And the land use authority can be staff, it can be the planning commission, it can be another body. There's a lot of options. What this says is the planning commission that is the land use authority for conditional use permits. So you're the deciders. You have been all along, I think, but this just makes it clear now that under the designations that are in the state code, you're the land use authority, so you're the deciders for the conditional use permits. Then if you look up in paragraph 020, where I had the strikeout language, and we talked a little bit about this in the last meeting, your ordinance, as many ordinances around the state do, still had old language in it from way back when, the early days of zoning, where it basically said the commission may deny a permit, may grant a permit as applied for, or grant a permit with conditions and requirements. Which implies that you as the determining body can just say, yeah, we don't like it, we're going to deny it. You really can't do that under state code. On state code conditional use permits, it says shall be approved if conditions can be imposed to reasonable conditions to mitigate reasonably anticipated impacts. So the new language that's in that red paragraph 040 reflects that state code language and the ability of what you really can do. It says a conditional use permit shall be approved if those reasonable conditions are proposed or can be imposed to mitigate the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects in accordance with applicable standards. That's another part in the state code. You have to have some standards that are designated or that you're going to be considering. Your code has a lot of standards, and that's good. Because that gives you a basis on which you can make decisions about those conditional use permits and applications. You may want to look over those standards again, and they're listed further on down, starting in paragraph 080. But, and I didn't go over those in any detail. That's something I was going to give you a homework assignment on, to kind of look at those and see if there's anything there that you felt needed some modification. But I mean, basically they look pretty good. You know, you have a lot of things there that you consider and that you can make a basis for conditions. Back up to that paragraph 040, the red paragraph. Part 3 of that, or item number 3, says that if reasonably anticipated detrimental effects cannot be substantially mitigated by the imposition of reasonable conditions to achieve those standards, then the conditional use permit may be denied. That is the only basis on which you can deny a conditional use permit. if you really determine that there aren't any conditions we can put on this thing that can reasonably mitigate those impacts. It's just nothing we can do and nothing that the applicant can do. I'll tell you this right now, that's a really high standard. There aren't going to be many applications that are likely to meet that requirement, but it does give you that option to do that if it's so determined, if you really see that that's the case. You're just not going to be able to mitigate those bad impacts to the degree that's going to make it workable. And remember that the language here in the code is mitigate, not eliminate. Mitigate means to soften. It doesn't mean to eliminate them or get rid of them altogether. And so that's what you're kind of stuck with here, I guess. Might be the right word to use. But that's what you're required to do according to state code. And so the language that we've got in here now reflects that. So I think you're much more in compliance with state code now, or will be much more in compliance with this language than what you had in there previously. Let's talk about the appeals, which is now that paragraph 050. Before, your ordinance said that the persons who want to appeal the decision of the Planning Commission on a conditional use permit can appeal that to the city council. So basically what it's saying, it didn't say that they're the appeal authority. State code says that you have to have an appeal authority to hear appeals from administrative decisions. But that's essentially what this is saying, is that the council is that appeal authority. Like I put the land use authority in the previous one, we need to have language in here about an appeal authority. But generally, the land use attorneys, planners, professionals will tell you now that it's not a good idea to have your council as the appeal authority, because council members are really good at the legislative stuff. They're really bad at the administrative and particularly the appeals kind of stuff, because when administrative standards, you're different than, you're considering evidence to determine whether an application meets the requirements of your code. That's an administrative type of action. It's not a legislative, it's not an opinion type of an action. Councils are really good at that opinion stuff. That's what they're elected for, is to set policy for the community. And to set policy, you want to hear what the citizens think. They're really good at that. When it comes to making administrative decisions, it's a little tougher for them, because they feel like they're elected officials. They ought to be listening to the citizens. The citizens generally tell you opinions, not facts. And so when you get to an appeal authority, that's an even a little bit of a higher standard. You're almost acting like a court or like a judge. You're weighing evidence upon which a decision has been made, kind of like what a judge does when they're weighing evidence to determine who's right and wrong in a particular issue or case. That's kind of what happens in the appeal process. And councils are even worse at that than they are at administrative items. Sorry to be insulting you all.
I'm not insulted.
Didn't we talk about this traveling arbitrator or whatever?
So you have in your ordinance, you already have a section that deals with an appeal authority. It's 1010 of your code here. So what we've put in here, what I've put in here is that a person shall have the right to appeal the Planning Commission decision on a conditional use of permit, strike out the city council, and say to the Land Use Appeal Authority, in accordance with the provisions of the Morgan City Code, section 1010. So you've already got the process outlined in your code. We're just saying your conditional use permit appeals follow that process, rather than a different process, which is to go to the city council.
I'm glad of that.
So that's what I'm recommending here in this language change. Mr. Chair, if anybody has any different opinions or comments, this is the place to air them.
I think this is fantastic that you've taken the initiative to put the proposal together. Let's talk about anything that may, come to mind as you go through hearing what Wilf has shared. Otherwise, the next step from here is cleaning up based on this, and next month potentially make a recommendation to adopt to the city council to adopt the new ordinance.
Yeah, what I'd like you to do between this month and the meeting next month is, so when you look down there on that paragraph 080, the standards for conditions, take a look at that list. It's a long list, but see if there's anything there that you think doesn't fit, isn't appropriate, or maybe if there's something missing as you review a conditional use permit.
Now, these grids we have in front of us, what do you want us to do with those?
The
Is that
which, the,
Okay,
that's the next part of your assignment.
okay, all right.
So take a look at those standards. So the ones in 080 relate to all conditional use permits. So you're going to review all conditional use permits for these standards in 080. 090 has standards for particular kinds of uses. And I didn't print them out here because it's fairly lengthy. But you can see it if you just go to your copy of the code. And there's certain kinds of uses that you specifically designate, and you say specifically for these things, we want to look at these things. That's really good stuff to have in your ordinance. I got to commend you all that that's in your ordinance, because a lot of ordinances I see around the state don't have that stuff. But you've got it, and that's good. Take a look at that again and see if that looks appropriate to you. My guess is you're probably going to look at most of this and say, yeah, it looks fine, looks good. Maybe there might be something you might want to add, but I think by and large, you're probably going to leave those the way they are. Here comes the tougher part. These lists. You really have a lot of uses that are listed as conditional in your code. And I really think that these kinds of things were put together at the time when it was felt like that you had more discretion over whether to allow something or not. What you really ought to do is go back and take a look at these uses that are in each of these zones and consider them to be permitted uses. Don't think of them as conditional in terms of like, yeah, maybe it's a good idea and maybe it's not, kind of depending on where they are and how we feel that night and who the applicant is. Those things are not valid considerations, but honestly, that's what happens a lot of times when these kinds of things are considered. But because of the standards that we're required to have in state code, I would really encourage you to look at those uses that are listed as conditional as if they were permitted uses, and then decide, is it appropriate to have these in this zone or not? If you don't think it is, then let's take them out altogether. Maybe if it gets to the point where you say, yeah, generally, I think it's okay to have these in this zone, but there might be a circumstance whereby we should have some conditions on it. As an example, let's say you allow gas stations in a commercial zone. If the gas station's located next to a car wash and a car repair business, no big deal, right? You're probably not going to need to put a lot of conditions on that. But say your commercial zone also allows, like, say, a hospital and a nursing home. That's permitted in your commercial zone. Well, is it appropriate to have a gas station next to a hospital and a nursing home? Because if you list it in there as conditional, you probably need to allow it, but you may need to put a lot more conditions on it than you would if it were next to a car repair business and a car wash. So kind of use that as a thought process for whether you think it's appropriate to allow some of these things. And in some circumstances, you may need to put some conditions on. If you look at them and you say generally, well, most of the time, I don't think I'd really want to see these in this zone unless we do certain things, consider taking them out altogether. Or just make them permitted. Just make them permitted. If you think, yeah, that's okay, I don't see a problem with that, just make it permitted then. You can,
we
if you
look
still
at an
feel it.
example? So if I'm looking at this residential land use table, and I see the church. So it's a conditional use across all the zones.
Yeah.
If we're thinking you can put a church that should be a permitted use, then you're asking us to line by line go through these uses and say that one shouldn't even be listed because it's just permitted.
Yeah. Now, what you can do, let's, for a church, I think the reason it's in there is conditional. I think most people would say a church in a residential zone is fine. But the reason we put it in there as conditional is because maybe we wanted to put a little bit more landscaping there, or maybe a little more parking, or do something depending on where it is or how it works. That's fine, and you can certainly do it that way. But rather than going through all the brain damage of having to review every one of those, most of which are probably going to be just fine. If you have some standards that you think that they need to meet, like they all ought to provide a certain amount of landscaping, they all ought to provide a certain amount of parking or something, then make it permitted and list those standards right there for that use, which you can do. And then it doesn't require you to do it. The staff, when a church comes in with an application to go on a property in a residential zone, the staff will look at it and say, do they meet that landscaping requirement? Do they meet that parking requirement that have also been listed there? And if they are, bingo, they're good to go. And you don't have to go through all of the brain damage of having to have your meeting and, people coming in and not understanding what's really going on, and they yell at you and they think you guys are on the take or whatever. It might just simplify the process and make it a little bit more predictable. And so,
several years ago, and I don't think any of you were on the planning commission at the time, we tried tackling this as a city council and the planning commission, sitting down and going through this. What was the term you just used? Brain damage?
Yeah.
It was a fiasco. I mean, there is so much in there, and everybody had so many different opinions that we finally honestly, I think we threw our hands in the air and said, we're just going to walk away from this. This is too big of a hassle. So there is a lot in there. I guess my question is, and maybe I'm way oversimplifying it, but is there any type of language you can include that would almost eliminate that entirely?
eliminate.
Your list there of
Oh, you mean just not have any conditional uses?
well, you can have conditional uses, but would it have, I mean, as long as they can, comply with what you have. the
Yeah.
Conditional use. Does it matter if, does that list really, is that necessary? And maybe, like I said, maybe I'm just asking the
Well,
question.
so you're asking whether you even need a long list like this?
That's
of
what I'm
uses?
asking.
I mean, that's really a decision you need to make about how you want your ordinance to look. There are some cities that have much more general listings of land use rather than long lists of things.
Yeah,
They're much more generalized.
that's what we bumped up against. I think it became a daunting task for us to go through that list there and try.
Yeah.
And,
What I wonder is, could we break it down line by line, like instead of trying to tackle a whole list, like, could we just focus on a church and like maybe come up with an answer on a church, and then next month maybe we come up with an answer on like.
Just kind of do it as you go.
It'd be really, like you said, a lot of brain damage. It's a lot to think about, a lot to chew on. We probably can't really truly wrap our head around it and make a responsible decision,
That's a good point.
especially as a group of 7. And so I like, let's just tackle the church conditional use permits and just see if we can come to an agreement on that, and then move to the gas station. Like, maybe over the years, we actually get through the list.
That's not a bad approach, kind of an incremental way to do it, but it may be the way to do it rather than have to sit down and, spend all that time studying out the
It's
list.
so overwhelming, we don't make any progress.
Yeah,
But if we
that's a
make
really
progress
good point.
One line.
that's exactly what happened.
Pick your
The
top
incremental thing.
10.
That is a really good point.
The process for adopting this is if the ordinance is changed, city council, votes that in or not, but does that require any public input?
Yes, these ordinance changes will require you to hold a public hearing.
So if we did it incrementally, we could be having a public hearing
Every
every
night.
month.
Every time.
I guess my question is, do some municipalities or even have a list like that, or?
Oh, yeah. That's not uncommon to see ordinances with long lists of uses like this, but I've also seen ordinances that have much more generalized lists that are a lot shorter. We can certainly look at,
But also, isn't that a good responsible thing to be doing? Like, I understand maybe we don't want to have a public hearing on every single, but it's also really good practice for us. Hey, we're addressing this item on this thing, and here we go. And even though we don't want to hold another public hearing, here we go again. We're gonna have another one next week on
Most of the time, no one's gonna come.
Yeah, no, but yeah, very likely that'll be the
Not
case.
for those kinds of things.
But couldn't you do it more in a generic category sense, or say like restaurants? I see several things would fit underneath like food providers, right?
Sure.
And so you'd say restaurants, there's a tavern in here, there's a restaurant in here, there's a.
Lump them into categories.
You lump them into a category and you kind of come up with the permitted ones for the general stuff.
Yeah. Certainly. That's certain.
Like that kind of stuff. So you group it into, I don't know, maybe convenience stores, gas stations, or consumer goods. I don't know, whatever that is, but we could probably come up with that.
Yeah, that's certainly one way to do it.
Is there, I mean, I don't think we should be too prideful and think we can cover those categories on our own, or have to. There's gotta be a city that's done this already.
Yeah, and what I was going to suggest was, as what your one council member here suggested, we could bring you some alternative looks at how some other places have done their land use
Yes.
permitted and conditional uses.
I like that.
Is Airbnb on here?
That's a
There's a
good
bed and
question.
breakfast.
Short-term rentals,
VRBO.
they're usually, the term is short-term rental, but that's a fairly recent term, so I don't know exactly. That might be like, I don't know what it could be called any number of different things.
So
We can take a look.
just to kind of pull it together, I like the idea of if we are going to go through this, rather than making it a big task, seeing what we can parse out and compartmentalize it a little bit, because my concern is less about how daunting it is to handle, all the different opinions. It's becoming an expert on every single land use there and in every situation. You have to do all kinds of study. I'd rather have that as it comes up. Then we do that research and we go into depth for it and we make the policy, or recommend the policy. And we move on as we go. I like that approach, that iterative approach. But I also like the idea of, someone else has already done this work. I'm not ashamed to borrow from another city.
Well, let me do that. Let me bring you some examples from other cities just to show you how a different approach to how they do their permitted and conditional uses in their code is. That's much more generalized and compact. And see if you like that. See if you think that's something that'll work for your community.
Well,
that'll save you a lot of
I'd
work.
even like to see one that's maybe not compact, but how they handled it.
Mhm.
That's a little, if they're going to permit the church, here's the standards.
Yeah.
I'd be curious how they handled some of those things.
Yep, we can do that too.
Is there a chance what you present to us means it's really not handled? Like, because if you were to present our case to another city, like, could we handle this?
For these, well, I mean, what you've got here with like this long list, that's not that uncommon. A lot of communities have lists like this, but they really haven't gone much beyond this.
It doesn't mean it's been handled, or it's just like somebody drew it up somewhere along the way.
Yeah, a while ago, a long time ago.
So he's asking for a best practice, not just another practice.
Right. Yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah. And maybe what we could suggest is this. Why don't we, if you're comfortable and you're ready, maybe we should schedule the first part of what we talked about here tonight for a public hearing and to move that on. And then we spend the time doing the other work on the list of land uses and conditional uses as another phase of this, because that may take a little longer. But at least we get these initial changes on the administration of how to handle conditional use permits in the pipeline and get it going so that you get your code up to date for that part of it.
Comfortable with that.
So that would require that you need to schedule and hold a public hearing for that part of it now and move that on. So maybe for your next meeting. And then we'll
We'd
continue to
have a
work on
chance
these
to,
uses.
if we see something in the language, let's say we did that next month, it comes up as a public hearing, we see something in the language we want still tweaked.
Mhm.
We could still make that recommendation as
Yes.
we move it to the city council.
Yes.
Well, I don't see why not then. I mean, anyone else?
We can separate that out.
Can we get that then on the agenda for next month?
Yes, I was just gonna ask, Will, do you want me to go off of this and just put this in ordinance form and have it ready for Teresa for the March meeting with that ordinance?
I think so, but I think we need to get Steve's Steve or Gary's approval of this, and
Them to review it and then we'll put it on.
Is there anything else with this part of it? I mean, we still have our homework.
yeah, but I think we've got an approach. We'll move forward on this part of it, and then we'll come up with some ideas on how to work on the uses, the list of uses part of it.
Okay,
And the standards.
I think we're good there. We'll move on to the final agenda item. And just procedurally, Steve, guide me if I'm wrong here, but last month, what we're supposed to be doing is every July, we're supposed to be electing a new chair and vice chair for this commission, and we haven't done that. So what we wanted to do is get into that cycle, take care of it now. And so in January, we opened up nominations for a new chair. And we had 2 nominations, and the voting was 3-3. So we deferred that to this month as an agenda item. So we need to do this again, but my question is, do we reopen nominations and or do we move forward with where we left it, Steve? I just wasn't sure how to
I
execute
think
that.
that's up to us to make a motion.
Sure, that, yeah, obviously it's an interesting process. Generally what happens when there's a tie vote like that, it's continued to the next meeting, like we talked about last time. And so no decision was made, which doesn't mean that you start over, because realistically, there's still a motion on the floor. Does that make sense?
Okay.
It's just that there was no resolution to the motion.
Well, and part of it, my inclination was to open nominations again, if that was procedurally correct, just because we've got different people here than we had last time.
That's okay. And that's really within your discretion. I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, procedurally, it's obviously always better to follow the ordinance. And so it's better to do it in July. But on the other hand, since we haven't done it in July, we haven't been following the ordinance anyway. So we want to get on that cycle. So it's completely defensible
You're wrong
what it
to
is that
make
you're
it right.
doing. And so then what I would just basically, I mean, probably just get a consensus if the commission, if those folks there prefer to reopen it there, then you can do that. You can say, you know, since we failed to make a conclusion last time, that issue now is before us, and so we're going to start anew. And so again, either way is defensible, and so whichever way you would like to proceed.
And I'm honestly comfortable whichever. So what does everyone think? What do you want to do?
Well, I'd say I'd call for a motion. Somebody wants to open it up or proceed as unresolved.
Okay. So if you have a preference, then I would entertain that motion so that we can move forward with this one way or the other.
So a motion to continue what we're doing, or a motion to reopen?
Your choice, whatever your preference is.
I can make a motion. I think I can make a motion that we continue the discussion from last meeting. We continue the discussion from last meeting, and that we already have nominations by Wes Woods as Jim Brown as chair and Dan Dixon nominating Nathan McClellan as chair. And that we continue those and support those nominations. And as a committee, we make a vote on those 2.
Okay, that's the motion. Is there a second? Any further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous. Okay, so that leaves us with 2 nominations, Jim Brown and Nathan McClellan. We will vote. Now we've got an odd number, so there should be a majority. We will vote in the order that they were nominated. I don't know if there's a way to do that, but Jim was nominated first last month, and we voted first on Jim. So all in favor of Jim as chair, please vote.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Sorry, as of right now, Jim is the vice chair.
Correct, and we will be nominating vice chairs next, if that's where you're going. All in favor of Nathan as chair. 6-1. We'll likely be doing this again in July, so get on schedule. Now let's open up for nominations for vice chair.
Make a nomination for Jim Brown to be vice chair.
Do you accept the nomination?
Yeah.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Reese,
Okay,
vice chair.
Commissioner Reese is on the table. Do you accept the nomination?
I'm going to decline. Thank you.
Okay, any other nominations? Well, let's go through the formality of the vote. All in favor of Jim for a vice chair, please indicate. Unanimous. That covers us through July with Nathan chair, Jim vice chair. That also concludes our final agenda item. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Before you adjourn, can I just raise a question? Have you all received the notice about the upcoming land use training that's been scheduled for March 7th? Okay, so you're aware of that. That'll be held here.
Yep.
On March 7th, and I think the county has been invited to that as well, the county planning and staff. And
Gary also mentioned that in case some of them couldn't make it, that there's the one in Davis.
yes,
One of those dates is March 3rd and the other one's
February 24th. Mhm. And those, no, well, the one on March 7th is, the one in Davis County will be at Clearfield City Hall.
But the one for Morgan on March 7th.
Right.
Was that mandatory, optional, online option? How does that work?
Well, planning commissions are required now by state code to have 4 hours of training annually. This will fulfill 3 hours of that requirement. You fulfill another hour of that requirement by attending 12 meetings a year.
Would that sexual harassment thing we did last month count as an hour?
No, that's not land use training. It's got to
Okay.
be land use training.
All right. Okay, fair enough.
And was that all in person or was that one that could be joined remotely?
I don't know how you're setting it up here.
I thought Teresa said there would be a virtual option.
The book was available if you were here.
We schedule bathroom breaks.
All right, we
Good
do
point.
need to formally adjourn. Do your thing.
Oh. Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Meeting adjourned.